Hi, everybody. Welcome to our eighth Scranton isolation informants. I wonder if Pennsylvania is now in yellow. I wonder if when we move to green, I'm going to have to, when the time comes, I'm going to have to change the name of the series because we won't be as isolated. Should I make it Scranton less isolation informants? I'm not sure. We're delighted to have a very special guest that I somehow feel was like a sibling in a prior life, if there's such a thing, over the years. A very dear friend, both of me personally and of the University of Scranton Performance Music Ensembles, as well as two of the people I respect the most on campus. It's pretty exciting to be able to have them join us tonight. I'll start with them. Kathy Seymour is a campus minister who does social justice retreats and is also a guitarist with a wonderful alto voice. Kath, would you like to tell them a little bit? I keep calling her Gavigan because that was her maiden name because I was already here a couple of years when she was a freshman. So that kind of makes me feel like I should buy a gravestone. But go ahead, Kath.
Thanks, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really happy to be helping out with this program. It's been my pleasure to serve the university for quite some time as a campus minister and a social justice minister. And so I'm really super interested in this topic and bringing music to underrepresented populations and people who will obviously, I'm sure, appreciate it quite a bit and once they're introduced to it. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Sure. And that's one of the things that has always, Mark, and I think I've told you this before, been a real focus of performance music at the University of Scranton is presenting great music and a variety, a wide diversity of great music, great artists, and our students playing great music with and for great artists for the entire community. And that's one of the reasons the university has committed for 39 years now to abolish admissions charges for our concerts, which is pretty exciting. It leads us to having an audience that is just full of people that love music. Jeff, Dr. Gingrich is our provost academic vice president, but he is also, I knew this, but the students didn't until he stood in there with him and he remembered all of the words to a piece we were singing from when he sang it in college. And so he's got a lovely baritone voice that leans toward bass, but still has those higher ranges. And many of his kids are musically involved. And he actually just graduated a cellist from high school, Mark. Wow. Dr. Gingrich, Jeff, would you like to tell us a little about your background as a sociologist and social worker?
Sure. Thanks, Cheryl, for having me. This is a lot of fun. When Cheryl told me about this idea, I was really excited about it and so glad to meet Mark and have him be a part of all this. I've only been at the University of Scranton for 2 years now as the provost, but it feels like a lot longer since I started. It's just been a great experience, but one of my favorite parts by far is being able to, when I go to the concerts and watching the students in the orchestra and the band and the choir sing and watching Cheryl do her work. And I just love that part of my job. I grew up with music as always part of the tradition. Mostly in the church, actually. I grew up in a Mennonite church in which 4-part hymn singing was a very important part of what we did. And my father sang in a quartet, men's quartet, and they practiced at our house. And then lived in New Orleans for 6 years too, and particularly just fell in love with the Southern music, especially jazz, but also Southern folk and Cajun music and all of those kind of things. And yes, my son it's been wonderful watching him grow as a cellist as well. And so I'm really excited about the conversation tonight. And Mark, so glad to have you be a part of us.
Well, it's really wonderful being here. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it.
And this fella is with the multitude of cello cases behind him, like loaves and fishes. This guy first came to Scranton. A mutual friend brought us together, and I think it's been 12 to 15 years now. And he's been back maybe 5 or 6 times, scared the daylights out of me. You guys are going to love this, because the one time we were going out to lunch because he didn't eat all day. And I said, we got to get you food. And I looked at him and I said, well, where's the cello? And he was like, oh, I just put it back in the practice room. Do you remember this? And I was like, this is like a $gazillion cello. I don't want it alone in my building. And he's going, oh, no, there's an alarm system. And I put a humidifier there. And instead, I like dropped him at the restaurant, gave them my credit card, and went back and stared at the cello until he returned, because it was terrifying. But he is possibly, I think him and Yo-Yo Ma are my favorite cellists in the world. And having watched him, not only listening to him perform just opens hearts. It opens hearts. He does diverse programming that like his programs have just, and yet they're intellectually, they hang together, even though the stuff isn't always related. And he's fabulous with our students. You know, for the principal cellist of the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra to come in and work with non-major strings and make it just a delightful, joyful learning experience is something that brings somebody really dear to my heart. So it is a pleasure to invite him here. I am intrigued and enthralled by his Bach for Humanity project, and I am going to turn this over to Mark Kosower right now so he can tell us a little more about you and your life, and then launch into this Bach for Humanity, because I think it's genius.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. It's just a great pleasure being here. You're such a wonderful friend. It's interesting. I'm very happy you mentioned the diverse programming, because designing recital programs is kind of, I mean, of course, performing is my profession, but it's like a hobby. I really enjoy doing it. I enjoy designing programs for students and this type of thing. But I'm going to be a little less diverse tonight, because my project is centered around Johann Sebastian Bach, who is in a way the father of Western music and everything written since he was alive. If I just very briefly give my background, I grew up in a family of cellists. My father taught at the University of Wisconsin in Eau Claire for 37 years, was a performing cellist. My older sister lives in the Chicago area, performs regularly with the Chicago Symphony and Chicago Lyric Opera, and teaches at Northwestern and many other schools. I went to college after I studied cello first with my father and some teachers in the Twin Cities area, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then went to college, studied with Janos Starker. That was a life-changing experience musically and cellistically in so many ways. I went to then Juilliard, studied with Joel Krosnick, an incredible musician, and got to work with members of the Juilliard String Quartet, and Robert Mann, who had just left the quartet a few years earlier. What an amazing musician. I'll talk about that later. Then I taught at San Francisco Conservatory for a couple of years. All the meantime, keeping my solo career going. I was solo cellist in the Bamberg Symphony, and then ultimately came to Cleveland to be the principal cello here in the Cleveland Orchestra. So all the way back in 2007.
Mark, can I just
Yes.
one quick follow-up?
Absolutely.
You know, Kathy and Jeff and I, of course, we are raising children who are musicians, and we are
Yes.
musicians. And, you know, of course, you know my son Joseph from down at Eastern. And
Right.
I am also the child of a musician like you, although my father's specialty was polkas in high school and after he played classical bass, but then he went to accordion. What was it like to grow up with a parent that played the same instrument as you?
Well, for me, it was basically my whole musical life as a young boy revolved around my father, because he not only was the cello professor in town, he was also the organ professor in town and played organ at a Lutheran church. So hence I heard a lot of Bach. But he was basically my musical hero growing up, and he still is my musical hero. But once I reached in my teen years, I started having additional musical heroes to add to that. But it was a tremendous experience. And I always think it's a big plus having a parent or parents. My mother also plays a little piano, but having parents that are musicians, because they really know, they get it, they know what being a musician is all about. I would say from the parent side, it must be a very tricky thing to have to navigate, but so many parents do it so well. And I always, you always feel that richness in students as a teacher, when they're coming from musical families.
It's interesting because my kids picked as far as you could get away from what my main instruments were. So it's fascinating to me that you had the same instrument as your dad. But now I'll shut up and I'll let you talk about Bach for Humanity.
Not at all. Perhaps my family wasn't so diverse in that way. Cello was everything. So there was some organ and piano, but yeah, basically it was a family of cellists, at least 3 cellists. So in 2017, I came up with the idea for Bach for Humanity. And the reason that idea came up was because I was starting to feel, well, these were feelings that go way back, but I was really feeling strongly at that time that the divisions in our society were becoming more pronounced, and there was a decline in our social discourse publicly, and it just felt like things were pulling at the seams. And so I just thought to myself, I want to do something. And I came up with this idea, Bach for Humanity, which I'll speak about in a minute. But before I do that, I want to mention that I had the privilege of interacting with some of the legendary musicians of the 20th century that come from what's considered the greatest generation. And even before those musicians, one of my grandfathers was a serviceman in the Second World War, and he was repairing machinery 20 miles behind the front lines in the Battle of the Bulge. And so he was a war veteran. This generation, they became special simply because of what they had to go through and deal with. But on the music front of things, of course, Janos Starker, a survivor of a Nazi labor camp, and a hero. He was with somebody who got shot, and he didn't know anything about medicine, and he literally sewed the guy up and put his arm over his neck and ran across the street with him while there were bullets flying in the street. So I mean, that's the type of experiences he had. Another great musician through that generation, Robert Mann, I mentioned, having to be able to interact with him. And these may not be people who were service people, but and then also I'll mention Herbert Blomstedt, who is, in my mind, a life-changing musician to experience. And I mentioned these people because they had a real impact on me, musically and otherwise. Starker being one of probably my number one mentor, after my father. And the last thing he ever said to me, the last time I saw him, he said, the most important thing in our society is the principles and ideals that everything, that whatever is going to take place, it's done with human decency. And that really, struck home, and I've thought of it often, since then. That was in 2013. And then his other message was the importance, as if somebody who is in the arts, of sharing and spreading beauty throughout the world, because mankind is capable of such things to uplift and elevate people. And so those were the two last messages that he left me with. Now, going back to Bach for Humanity, it started as a 3-season initiative to bring the music of Bach as a solo cellist to Northeast Ohio. And the idea was to level the playing field, to play free concerts from donors of the Cleveland Orchestra, the Cleveland Institute of Music, and artist series, to people from different socio-economic spheres who would not necessarily have the funds to attend a concert. And so just free concerts, and also to bring the music to them. So I performed over 3 seasons from everywhere from regular concert series, Arts Renaissance Tremont here in Cleveland, the Cleveland Cello Society, to places like the Cosgrove Center for the Homeless, the East Cleveland Adult Activity Center for the disabled, and then also in education venues such as the Cleveland School for the Arts. And I have to say, it was a really, as you might expect, but you never know how it's going to happen, but it was a life-changing experience. There were a couple things when I was waiting to get into the Cosgrove Center for the Homeless. There was a person there, a homeless man, and he started talking to me, and we had a great, amazing conversation. He went to Cleveland Heights High School. He used to go to Cleveland Orchestra concerts, and it really sent the message to me really quickly that for whatever the reasons were, this is somebody who just was dealt a really bad hand in life. And this is somebody who was very educated, very highly intelligent, and could be, if you didn't know any better, and if he wasn't, dressed a certain way, he could be working as a high-level a person in any institution. And so that was one really powerful experience. And another one was at the East Cleveland Adult Activity Center, and I gave a very a shorter presentation there, only 30 minutes, and only movements from Bach suites. But it was very interesting because at first there's a lot of chatter, but over the course of 30 minutes, it got softer and softer and softer and softer. And, okay, I'm the performer, but no, it was the music of Bach that was reaching out to them. And then I spoke a little, and after the presentation, there was somebody who had trouble speaking in an articulate way. And I was just turning to leave, and he grabbed my arm like this, and he looked at me with such an intense look, and then he just said, "Good night," and walked out. And that was, there more was said in that experience than you can put into words. So the project initially was over 3 seasons, but I actually was able to get through all of the 6 cello suites and my own transcriptions of the Bach violin sonatas and partitas in about 2 years. And I will elaborate on that and what comes next in a minute. But I wanted to now, first of all, just the philosophy of the project is the idea is that Bach's music has been a source of comfort, love, joy, inspiration, triumph, and compassion for the last 3 centuries for people all over the world, and it is these human emotions and states of being that can unify all of us on common ground and provides us the opportunity to create a world for something greater than what any of us could individually achieve. And that's really the core of what the project was built on, to bring people together. I mean, that's the whole point. And music does that, but Bach does it in this beautiful way, and has been just such a resource for everyone. And to tell you how powerful this music is, we should start with what the greatest musicians who ever walked the planet said about their contemporary Bach, or these are generations afterwards, but starting with Mozart. I mean, he wasn't composing too many years after Bach died in 1750. And one thing he said about Bach was, "Now there is music which a man can learn something from." And that's coming from the greatest, melodic genius who ever lived. And then you have Beethoven, who said, not brook, because in German Bach means a brook, not brook, but oceans should be his name. Meaning that his music is so rich that it would take an entire ocean to be the container for the musical expression and richness that exists in this music. Brahms most famously said, "Study Bach, there you will find everything." So another accolade for the incredible richness of the music. Wagner said, Bach is the most stupendous miracle in all of music. And Wagner was a pretty great musician himself. Somebody who changed music forever with Tristan and Isolde and the famous Tristan chord, and the flavors in his music then permeated every composer that followed. One of my favorite quotes about Bach comes from Claude Debussy. He said that Bach is a benevolent God to which all musicians should offer a prayer to defend themselves against mediocrity. So high praise coming from these musicians. Now, if we look to how about the great musicians who have played the music, I'll start with the father of modern cello playing, which was Pablo Casals. He was the first cellist to move away from this idea that you play the way you play the cello is in blocks. There's the upper positions and the lower positions, and you need like a crane to get yourself to the next position in an awkward way. And Casals was the first cellist to really streamline the technique up and down the instrument through the not much thought of middle positions. And what did Casals say about Bach? He said he's the supreme genius of music. Casals had a routine. Every day he started his day the same. He went outside and went for a walk because of his firm belief that music came from nature and that the source needed to inspire the individual in order to create art. And then he went back home. When he finished his walk, he would go to the piano and play 2 Bach preludes and fugues. And he did that, and it was like a cleansing, a spiritual renewal every day. I mean, it sounds like a great way to start the day for anyone, really, for me, or in my opinion, if I look at that. And then another great 20th century musician, the pianist Glenn Gould, who was, of course, famous.
My favorite.
Yes.
My favorite.
One of the greatest keyboard Bach interpreters ever. And, when I was starting this project, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew what it was about. But I stumbled upon this quote from Glenn Gould, and I'm like, that's the project. That's it. And what Glenn Gould said, he said about Bach, he said, "I really can't think of any other music which is so all-encompassing, which moves me so deeply and consistently, and is valuable beyond all of its skill and brilliance for something much more meaningful than that, its humanity."
Mark, it's interesting because at the same level, we deal with non-majors. We deal with people, many of our students don't have very much technical training. Everybody, as you know, everybody is there just because they love to make music. They are from every major across the curriculum. And at one point, and of course, obviously you're doing Bach with, your choirs and with the string orchestras, but there are these wonderful, and Kath and Jeff, I don't know if you know about this. So Stokowski did these amazing arrangements of Bach for orchestra. And Alfred Reed took them, and I don't know if you know this, and orchestrated them for band. So to give the band a sense of the genius of Bach, I of course put them on in my 4-year or 5-year rotation. So everybody gets a taste of this. And these super bright kids, I had a science kid come up to me and say, on this program, you have a little bit of an arrangement of a Mozart, and Mozart touches my brain and makes sense to my brain. And then we're doing this Shostakovich, and it was a program of all transcriptions. And that last movement of that Mahler, and that makes sense to my heart. But the Bach makes sense to my head and my heart and sets me on fire.
Absolutely.
So from the mouth of somebody doing it just because they love it, not because they can sit and do, the counterpoint through musical offering.
Yes, exactly. And I want to move for a second from, now we've talked about composers and the great musicians who played the music. What about some musicians or people that spread into some other areas? I'll bring up, of course, the famous historical figure Albert Schweitzer, who was unbelievable, like a Renaissance man. He was a theologian, he was a philosopher, he was a musician and a great proponent of Bach. And then he did something so wild and was left that a career behind abruptly, studied medicine, and then moved to West Africa to open a hospital and to work, or a clinic there. And during that time, he developed his philosophical ideas of just having a reverence for life and for living, and to which he won the Nobel Peace Prize then in 1952. But there's a direct connection with those humanitarian ideas and the music of Bach, because Bach is about, of course, the triumph over struggle, and it also offers people, whether you're religious or not, it makes no difference. It offers you a glimpse of what another philosopher said, what it feels like to be religious towards and devoted towards something greater than the self. Most of the love that is spoken about in modern society is of course, the personal love between two people and self-fulfillment and the union of the couple, but not as much as spoken about being devoted towards a higher cause, which in itself again fits into society issues of our current age, and how in order to overcome the challenges that are out there right now, not only locally, nationally, but globally, it's going to take a devotion to a higher ideals and a coming together of everyone, just like the music of Bach offers, so that we listen to each other and take care of the needs of all the citizens and come up with a compromise, or which is what democracies end up doing in order to solve problems that everybody can more or less agree on, or that solves the issues. And so that requires, it's kind of like playing in an orchestra too, actually, because you can't be a good orchestral musician unless you're really going to participate in some give and take, which means sometimes you get to do what you feel like doing and what's good for you at the moment, and other times you can't do what feels good for you at the moment, and instead need to give the ensemble what it needs at that moment. And so that's perhaps like being a citizen in society as well. I mean, I think there's a direct connection, which is why the arts are so valuable, because there are so many lessons to be learned that you can apply to real-time life and experiences. And so that, and then moving forward, after I finished my Bach for Humanity a 3-year commitment to Northeast Ohio, I was making plans right after the holidays in January to export the project to other places nationally and internationally, and to also not only to play solo Bach performances, but to also include Bach-inspired programs written or consisting of music written by composers who were inspired by Bach, and also potentially some collaborations with other musicians. But then came COVID-19, which it was shocking, of course, that this virus did what it did to the world. Everybody was shocked. But in a way, again, what it did was it brought to the forefront and put the spotlight on sort of the divisions and issues in society that have been around for actually a very long time. And if we talk about in this country and globally too, a decade ago, they were talking about the widening gap between various groups of people politically and things. So it's been and the roots go way back. So in a sense, while it may initially the issues look overwhelming or like a crisis, I think it's actually also a wonderful opportunity to just and the fact we're in COVID-19 and haven't been able to do as much in our own lives out in the world since there's been a lot of staying at home the last few months. But because of that, we have this opportunity to think about what has happened and to come up with ways to come together and think about a better future for the people that we care about, such as our children, and we've had a lot of number of our former presidents speak. I was personally touched by George W. Bush when he said that we are all equally vulnerable and equally wonderful in the eyes of God, and whatever our divisions are, we shouldn't go at each other, with fists. We should instead, work together for our common causes. And then also when Barack Obama, he said he saw limitless potential when he looks at his children and that generation of what's possible. And if I think about that, if I would immediately think about the key of C major and what that means in Bach's music about salvation, what it means about triumph, what it means about limitless inspiration, having overcome, all the struggles that exist in life and in the music. After all, Bach is the king of harmony and counterpoint, among many other things. And perhaps, having said that, now might be a good time to play the jig from the third cello suite of Bach in C major to demonstrate exactly what I just said.
Yay. It's interesting, while he's getting his cello, I think one of the other things this pandemic has done is make us realize how much we need and rely on one another, and how important a sense of community is. And, in terms of your analogy to in the orchestra, and I'm really boiling him down here, but Wynton Marsalis always talks about how there can be no inequity on the bandstand if you're going to make good music, and uses that as a metaphor for society.
Absolutely. And one thing about an orchestra, too, which, like you said, mirrors society, is the last chairperson in a string section is every bit as important as the principal player of another section or that person's own section. They may not be as much in the spotlight, but they can make or break an ensemble and it's amazing. It really is a team effort, and it's like, well, not everybody can be mayor or president either, but the mayor can't do an incredible job if he or she doesn't have a supporting cast that helps them do that. And so everybody is equally important and valuable. So this is one of my favorite movements in all of the Bach cello suites for precisely the reasons I spoke about. I lost the sound on Cheryl.
That was amazing. That I'm crying because boy, did I forgot. I didn't think how much I needed some beauty there. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, well, pleasure is mine. And you know, it's that was the movement 2 nights ago. I in Cleveland at Trinity Cathedral. I played 3 of the 6 suites in a benefit concert to raise money for COVID-19 people, and also a couple of various arts organizations, including Trinity. And the idea there too is that to put this suite last, I actually kind of thought of the 3 suites. I played the odd number ones, 5, 1, and 3. And the idea was that 5 is in C minor is it's very dark, and there's something very brooding, and it almost kind of represented the sort of what we're facing at the moment.
Oh, I mean, racial unrest, civil unrest, inequity, social injustice, and I feel like music is an expression of our common humanity across time, across space, across differences.
Exactly. It's exactly precisely that. And then the G major is like kind of an awakening. There's a compassion, there's a pastoral quality, and also for me, it sounds very much about being thankful for what you have, being thankful for whatever, and maybe you can't be with your family in COVID-19. Maybe you can't. Maybe you don't have employment at the moment. But there are always these something to be thankful for, and be thankful for what you have, and use that as a place to start and build. And that I think is the message in that piece, and also just to striving for something greater. That's what like in Jesu joy of man's desiring, it's in the same key, G major. That's he talks about wisdom, love, and about the soul flying, and just striving for something greater. And then you have the C major suite, which is basically it can't really be much more joyful than that, I think. And also there's a lot of there's a bit of humor in Bach's music too. If you find it in the latter, especially in the latter movements of the suites, and this one too, there's quite a bit of wit there. Also with there was a great quote from Bach himself I wanted to share about what music is for. And if I can dig that up here, it was really something worth talking about. But I'm running. It'll show its face, I'm sure. Here, J.S. Bach. He said the master that everybody says is the greatest composer and musician who ever walked the planet. He says, the aim and final reason for all music should be none else but the glory of God and refreshing of the soul. Where this is not observed, there will be no music, but only a devilish hubbub. And again, I would say you don't have to be religious. I think it's just totally universally applicable to all religions, to people of non-religion. It's about striving for something greater than the self and for a reverence for all living things.
And I think also that's how we find the way, for those of us who are religious, to see God in each and every one of each other.
Yes, exactly. And to it's a reflect, right? And he is reflected in each and every individual, and I think that is in itself is a foundation for a society. The value of the sum of the whole of all the people in that society, and so coming out of that, and to be talking also about historically too, the role of music in society, and especially in times of upheaval and turmoil. We talked about the music of Bach, but of course there's a lot more music in the world well beyond Bach, by countless other composers, different types of music. And if we start in Europe, if we look at the rise, in classical music, probably one of the absolute most interesting times in our history is the late 19th century and early 20th century, before the First World War, and then also between the two world wars. The rise of nationalism in Europe, and also, and that, of course, in the middle of the 19th century, you have Germany and Italy unifying the states in nationalistic movements there, just politically, and then in our field as musicians, classical music in Europe was pretty Germanic centric. Probably 60-70% of the music we play is from German speaking lands, and then you have the French music, which is its own thing, which is a very significant portion, and then everybody else contributes, but doesn't have the quantity of those two countries at that in this point of time.
And I'm gonna actually probably short circuit a whole bunch of your cards, because I just wanted to let you know that coming up, we also have, when we get to American music, we have the archivist from the Louis Armstrong House and Museum, along with the leader of the Louis Armstrong Centennial Band, that are going to talk about Louis Armstrong, and also the great jazz historian and founder of the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, Lauren Schoenberg. And we're going to talk about jazz and how it created bridges and opened doors during the middle to late 1900s as part of the civil rights movement.
Fantastic.
So, you can just rip up all the cards that are American music. We got that.
Sounds good. No. So but in Europe, the reason I think it's really interesting is you had a lot of different, of course, artistic movements in the arts, and coming from other angles too, from philosophy and such. And it created several, these movements then, of course, went into music, and music at that time and through history in Europe was always the last area of the arts to explore those movements. But they were very much in reflection and were expressions of what were going on in society at the time. And, if you look at the Germanic music, you had a couple movements going on. The late Romanticism of Richard Strauss, of particular music of Mahler, and then even going next door into France, you have late Fauré. You have music that doesn't ever really truly resolve, and you extended tonality, the whole idea. And this is it creates a sustained tension. It was the tension that was felt in society because of feelings of oppression. It was imperial rule, and underneath the surface, a lot of things were boiling. That then, when the match was lit in Bosnia, that started the First World War. And so you have that movement, and then you have, of course, the music of the Second Viennese School. You have Schoenberg. Some people say the creator of the anti-music. This type of protest. I mean, in a way, it was a protest against everything associated with the establishment, and even in music as well, and challenging all the systems that had been in place for hundreds of years, and all these things that were signs. And then you have also nationalism spilling over into other countries. One of the first countries always comes to mind is Hungary, with Kodály and Bartók, rejecting the strong influences from Germanic music, and being in search of a truly authentic Hungarian music, and also then traveling through the countrysides in neighboring countries for the same purpose: Romania, Serbia to the north. And you have nationalistic movements in the Czech Republic with Smetana and Dvorak, and Poland, all over Europe, Norway, Spain, you name it. And so these are ways that, and folk music is one way that music can be used to express, to celebrate a heritage and all of the traditions associated with that, and also to make a statement for change as well. Folk music, and then I will, as you said, spare the 20th century American music, but
I'm always fascinated by the fact that all music from Mahler to Mingus, has basically expressed the basic things that every human being is concerned with: equity, love, heartbreak, oppression, pain, sadness, joy, faith. And it doesn't matter what the difference is between all of the years, all of the nations, the races, the faiths. They're the same things that every human being needs to express. So all of this music from all of these different traditions and areas all speaks
exactly
to the same human commonality of soul.
Yes.
That everybody who is human has in common. And it's, I think, germane to that, I mean, I think I'm pretty sure the single only thing that the United States of America has contributed to culture on a worldwide scale is musical. And, it came from Black America, jazz, American music. Yes. That is the only thing that is uniquely American, and it expresses all those same things. So whether you're in I'm so bad at geography. Oh my God. I lose at Trivial Pursuit. But wherever you are back in like the 1800s that there was strife, and wherever you are in the 1920s where there was strife, and in the 40s and in the 60s and in 2001 and in 2020, you still have people expressing what they need, what they yearn for, and what they hope for, and also helping comfort themselves and express themselves through music, no matter where it's from.
Exactly. And what makes music great is how effectively it communicates those messages, and also how it transcends a various situation or point in time, and it can contain a universal message. Music is, I think it's always unifying. It always brings people together. The question is, in what sense? Is it a unification in the Beethoven sense of music for all of humanity, or is it a unification for a certain community of people, or is it, and also for what purpose? But I mean, like you said, it's always for expression, but it can be, certainly there's music to create courage, and also to send armies into battle. There's music to comfort people who have been suffering, and there's just lots of reasons. And I will add, as great of a gift as music is, it also can be manipulated to carry out unsavory and negative acts. And of course, probably the most obvious example would be, because it's so well documented in history, would be the Nazis' use of the music of Wagner. Wagner may have been an unbelievable racist in the 19th century, but the music he wrote has nothing to do with racism and propaganda and anything. It's totally unrelated, and this is why an artist of the stature of Daniel Barenboim brought the music of Wagner to the state of Israel. He was the first musician to do that, to perform Wagner there. But music can be used to and of course through various societies negatively as propaganda. So it's one of the most powerful things on earth. Music is one of the most powerful things we have, and generally speaking, it is something that unifies people in a positive way, but it's also something that needs to be cared for.
Mark, I know that Kathy and Jeff have some questions, and I'm going to ask anybody who is with us watching on Facebook, if you would like to ask some questions in the comments. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Did you have something else you were going to play for us?
I certainly can.
Oh, please. Good, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay, great.
Oh, thank you.
So I have a saraband from the G major Bach suite.
Oh, yay.
And this movement is very meditative, reflective, and offers those ideals of, the seeing broader horizons, striving for something greater, but in a very meditative, contemplative way. So that reminded me why I should have used my little rock stop, because I had the end pen into the carpet and I was getting some nice rattles out of the end pen in the middle of that. But never.
Maggie said to tell you that you must have remembered that was her favorite of all, a favorite movement of all of the suites. So she said thanks and continuing undying admiration.
Well,
Kathy, Jeff, what do you got for us here? You got some ideas, and I'll start bringing in some of the questions from our commenters, but you guys take it away.
I can start. Thank you. First of all, that was absolutely gorgeous. My first question, and you talked a little bit about your history of musical and growing up in a musical family. Was Bach your first love as a musician?
I would say so, probably because from being an infant, I heard my father. He was always practicing the suites on cello, and also I grew up in a Lutheran church. And my father was the organist, and of course, Bach being not only the father of Western music, but also of the Lutheran music from the Lutheran Church. Of course, there were musicians before him, great musicians, but Bach is generally regarded as the greatest.
Sure. And can you, just a follow up to that, could you tell us what other music you really enjoy, that you love, that you just play for yourself?
Oh, well, I always say it's hard to pick a favorite composer when you love music so much. Of course, all the great, Viennese composers, Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, Brahms, Schubert, the Impressionists, Debussy, Ravel, the other Romantics, great composers, Dvorak, Tchaikovsky. Oh, in the 20th century, Stravinsky is going to be remembered perhaps as the greatest composer, along with Bartók and a few others. But I should use a quote that I heard somebody say not long ago. There's good music and there's bad music. That's it. So meaning there's great music in every genre. There's great music of all kinds. And there's so much of it to enjoy and to experience.
Duke Ellington said there's great music and then there's the other kind.
The kind that leads us to a devilish hubbub, according to
right. Jeff?
So Mark, just kind of building on that, and thanks again. I could literally listen to you all night. Just beautiful music. And this is a great conversation. But building on that question, are there other genres of music that you particularly like to listen to, and particularly that give you hope and comfort and calmness in the way that we're talking about Bach does?
Well, I'm spending the vast majority of my time in, of course, in classical music. That's what I will be hearing the most. I certainly am a lover of jazz. I love and folk music, and even many popular music on the airwaves. Sometimes it's nice just to hear a simple song and a secular song also as well. So I pretty much can go with any type of music. Sure. And I like to listen to different types of music and music from different places. I think sometimes with technology and we can send our music anywhere, but it's fun to dig up something that's really particular to a certain corner of the world.
Nice, great.
Us guys, this is interesting, and we do have Kathy. I have a question from a viewer, but first, what do you guys like when I get done? I feel obligated to watch the news every day because you have to know what the hell's going on, and my heart gets broken in 1,000 pieces. I can't even go there. And afterwards, I listen to. I find that the things that are Mahler symphonies, particular movements, and Duke Ellington sacred concerts are the only thing that can give me hope again. What about you guys? You two? We know Mark, we know me, Jeff, Kathy. What are the things that, when you watch social injustice and misery and death and illness, and, it seems like I'm waiting for frogs to fall out of the sky, right? Like, what's the thing that makes you be able to get yourself back together, get up and move?
I would go back, like I said at the beginning, that, and I don't have when I'm able to kind of, what I grew up with 4-part harmony hymn singing, that gives me that sense of kind of joy and calmness and peace in a way that, and I don't get to do that a lot anymore, but it really, that brings me back when I'm able to do that. Kathy?
I actually like a lot of folk music, and even some contemporary stuff I find very helpful, very encouraging. Right now I'm really into a group called I'm With Her. It's a trio of women, and they're just dynamite. They've covered some classic folk, and they have some of their own, and they each have individual careers as well. But even some older groups like the Indigo Girls, who do some really socially activist, socially engaged type music, but are beautifully and technically wonderful and great harmonies. And sometimes, just a song I want to sing along to. So all of those I find really helpful.
Great. So we have a question here that came in on the chat board, and that is, what single distinctive quality or technique do you think most sets apart Bach's music from all other composers, Mark?
Well, that's quite a question. Probably, if you look at his music, again, the invention, the genius of harmony, all this technical stuff. But what makes it great probably is the spirituality of the music. It's what, again, it makes people who are atheists want to be religious, and it makes the people who are religious, kind of as a verification of, or almost as something that makes their beliefs even that much more compelling. There's an affirmation there, and so I think the spirituality of the music is what sets it apart from all else, and of course also the level of ingenious, the intelligence of the music as well. I mean, it really, of course, in the Christian faith, you have the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and you have, and in music, we have the mind, the heart, and the spirit. And great music satisfies all of those in some sort of a balance. And Bach's music perhaps does that better than anyone else.
Great.
We have another question from a listener who says, when I listen to you play, it sounds more like a quartet or an ensemble than a single instrument. Why is that?
Oh, that's a great compliment. Thank you very much. Well, it has to do with, I would say, voicing and hearing things in a polyphonic way. I find with time and age that really interests me more and more. And when you play a single line piece like a solo Bach suite, you have to recognize that there are still different lines going on there, and then from there, how can you get those lines to communicate, to comment off of one another, foreshadow, and to reflect on what has come, and in a very active and rich dialogue. And so that's what I try to do, and whoever said that, I thank them very much for the compliment.
That was one of my choir alumni.
Ah, fantastic.
I was thinking that as well. I thought it was a great question. The next question is, if we looked at this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. If we looked at your most played list on your iPod or whatever you have these days to keep your music, what would we find? What would we find on your most played list?
Oh, interesting. Well, I listen to a lot of different things. I actually don't often go to something for. Well, I do casual listening, but it's mainly with other people. But what have I heard recently off popular music? Lady Gaga, Beyonce, all the pop, the real big name stuff, and those kinds of things. I love, of course, Miles Davis and Duke Ellington, and in the classical spheres, I was thinking of my favorite pieces while I was talking, and I'd have to say the Dvorak cello concerto. If you're a cellist, it's not what I will necessarily go listen to on a playlist regularly because I play it and teach it and deal with it so much. But the piece blows me away every time I hear it, and it almost doesn't matter who's playing it. It's just an unbelievable work. And the Mozart Jupiter Symphony, if that isn't enlightened and inspired, and with that 5-part fugue in the last movement, I don't know what is. And so, I mean, just and the message there, there's, again, I think that piece really touches all the senses too. It's philosophical, higher thought, but it's also just exhilarating, just so inspiring. So across the board, hopefully that helps some. But I don't actually carry around anything to listen to, but I do listen to things just casually with people. So,
Mark, I'm going to toss out a listening suggestion to you.
Yes.
Because I find right now I just almost every day this week I turn to it. Wynton Marsalis's Pulitzer Prize winning Blood on the Fields.
That
It is just, I mean, right now, this is something that I can't go out and protest because of my health, Yes. And for me, listening to this helps me gather my thoughts and my emotions. Give it a shot.
Do you know?
Buy it. Don't just steal it.
I will say, Wynton Marsalis came to Cleveland with the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, and I mean, it was very clear when he played and took the stage. He's just simply one of the greatest musicians who's ever soloed with us, period. He transcends whatever he plays. It's much more than whatever style music he's playing. He's just that powerful in terms of communication.
He's a member of the University of Scranton class of 1996. Were you aware of that?
I was not aware of that. What a feather in your cap.
Honorary doctorate. And
that's amazing.
And commencement performer. Jeff, you had a question?
Well, I'm just kind of thinking about somebody who wants to, maybe who grew up with other kinds of music, but really wants to learn about classical music. And, who do you start with? So if somebody said to you, kind of, I really want to learn about and learn to love classical music, where do we start? Where do I start with that? What would you say to them?
Well, if you're being introduced to any type of music, I think what's the most important thing is, and really learning any subject, is finding the point of access. So if it's about learning something, it's meeting whoever the student, or if it's a student, or if it's just a friend or somebody you want to introduce to something, but meeting them in a place where they can access whatever it is you're trying to introduce them to. In music, one of the classical music, one of the easiest composers to latch onto probably is Beethoven, just because, I mean, if you listen to the Fifth Symphony, I don't think it needs a lot of explanation, in a way, although there's a lot to talk about and explore there. But I mean, there's just something so fundamental about the music. But for classical music, I would introduce probably short segments from a lot of different composers, because you could take, for example, a movement of Mozart, and you could turn around and take something from Webern or something, and then take Stravinsky, and then take Brahms. I mean, just move a movement from whatever piece you choose with these composers, so they really get like a variety pack of classical music. Because to say all music is even a composer as great as Beethoven, or to say all music is, like Debussy, I mean, they're just so different from each other, and it's just such a rich history of what's been done in Western classical music for, centuries.
Great, thank you.
We have another question from our listener, Lynn. She says, what advice would you give to a young person embarking on a career in music right now, given the challenges of COVID-19?
Well, right. I mean, that's
savings account.
I think probably the best mindset would be, this isn't, not at the moment perhaps, but even at the moment, it's an opportunity. I was talking to Cheryl and other people about this sort of, what's been happening even before COVID-19, of how the internet is becoming an increasing medium for communication in all fields, and in music is no exception. A lot more activity online, and basically what COVID-19 did is really speed that up. The development online has been tremendous in the last couple months, and just to look, there are through technology, there are so many ways to connect with people and do meaningful things, whether it's in education or online virtual performances, or forums like what we're doing right now, and create. And also there are many people doing programs or shows about music, and tied, for children's shows or tied to specific topics. So and at the same time, in the last 10 years, there's been a very strong entrepreneurial movement going in classical music, and in the education, teaching people how to implement their ideas and be creative, how they essentially take charge and make their own careers in creative ways. And so in a way, this is a real opportunity to do that, because of course, a lot of our normal activities have stopped. And I really believe that the technology and whatever we're learning, the things we are innovative with now, are going to be around when we're all able to be together again, and are going to play meaningful roles and in ways we probably don't even realize or know what's possible right now. But and also it's important to remember that in times of turmoil, this is when how important music is. That this is a time when people need music more than ever. So, and whether it's online, and also now there are people are going out and playing socially distanced performances outside now. This is starting, and so there are all kinds of ways. But just I would just say the advice would be just to apply yourself, be creative, and do something meaningful for others and yourself to make a difference.
And I would have one more very practical piece of advice. As my son really is just hitting his stride in his career, and I would suggest, I know who that viewer is, and I would suggest one of the greatest things you could do right now for a young musician is talk to them about the actual value of what they have to offer. And the two things they could be doing is talking to their friends about buying music rather than stealing music. Pay for it, whether it's on iTunes or whatever. Because right now, there's not really much of a recording industry. Even film work is often work for hire without any renewable source of income. And then give your kid a couple of grand to buy a really good microphone. Because for all the stuff that is online, whether it's speaking or whatever, if you have a young musician who is going to have to operate remotely for a while, whether it's, teaching lessons or performing or creating or whatever they're going to do, they need a good quality microphone. And, I'm not like a $80 plug-in for what that's worth. Jeff.
Well, just to kind of build on that, what do you, and Cheryl, you can speak to this as well, but Mark, what do you see as the near future for music and for city orchestras? And, what is the talk now about when we will be able to come back and at least practice or at least employ some of the musicians that are in orchestras or symphonies and other kinds of things that musicians rely on? What's the talk out there now?
Well, that's an interesting question, and actually the sort of the pace of reopening is sort of following the pace at which the virus affected various parts of the world. So for example, it was first in China, and China was probably it was the first country to where its orchestras began playing again. I mean, there are orchestras in Shenzhen and Beijing and other places that are actually working right now in, I assume, a socially distanced way. And now, very recently, within the last week, there are orchestras started playing in Europe again. And they've done some very serious studies. The Berlin Philharmonic was involved in a very serious study, and I believe the Vienna Philharmonic as well, about what is actually safe in terms of the musicians on stage and about how the virus spreads. But they have found a way to, and they're starting to perform now. Now, because the virus came to America after the Far East and Europe, I think we're kind of have an advantage because as in the orchestra world, because we can kind of watch Europe and Asia and see how it goes and what problems come up, so that when it's our turn to take the stage again, that we can try to avoid those problems that may or may not come up from dealing with the virus that has no cure at this time. But I know the plan is with orchestras across this country and elsewhere is to find a way to safely and gradually come back to being a full orchestra, but it's going to take some time, and it may involve, performances. It definitely is going to involve performances of very small groups right now, with outreach of like a string quartet size or something like that, and maybe outdoors, or if it's indoors and socially distanced. And then the hope is, I think, maybe as much as half of the size of a normal symphony orchestra could be on stage socially distanced performing, and in the gradual move towards everybody being back. So
I've been talking to a lot of our alumni physicians and epidemiologists and virologists, and also a lot of my colleagues in Pennsylvania in higher education as far as band, orchestra, and chorus. And I honestly don't think that we're going to see any large ensembles. I think for professional groups, that's going to happen a little quicker. And I think that that's because they are professionals and they're adults, and this is how they make their living. And I think, the caution for us, those of us who conduct in music education at any level, is to just always remind ourselves when we see these things. It's very exciting. And Mark and I had talked about this a little this past week, to see these studies coming out of Berlin and say, well, a lot of those germs stay inside, the tubing of the trumpet. But they are professionals and they're adults. And like the West Point band is using plexiglass. Well, if you tell someone, at West Point, now here's what you have to do. You have to spray your plexiglass with alcohol. You can count on them to do it. We have to remember in music ed, at every level, we have to stop worrying about teaching music and remember first that we're teaching kids.
And I might also add that what I've been seeing is the most sort of high-class organizations are being very, very cautious and are making decisions generally based on science and what they feel is appropriate for the people involved. Just like you're saying, if you're dealing with grown adults, it's a very different situation than with young people who are less experienced. And so, I think it remains to be seen in terms of audiences. Because symphony orchestras generally play for large congregation of people, audiences will probably be limited the longest in terms of being able to congregate in large numbers. And I don't think anybody is expecting to be playing for large audiences anytime soon.
I think that what is also happening is people focusing more on, okay, so let's see if we could have a quartet or a nonette or, a small group within guidelines. And, maybe strings would be the easiest because we can wear masks, strings, percussion, smaller ensembles, and then not having the audience, except you're going to live stream the performance. And for professional groups, there are now places starting to experiment with how they could be the pay-per-view, like Medici TV. So e-commerce along with, live streaming to make some of that happen. And I think that eventually, I don't know this, but I think that you'll see a middle ground where there will be maybe 25% of your audience in the concert hall, and they will pay one ticket price. And then the other 75% of your audience will listen remotely at a reduced ticket price. But of course, you will be able to sell more depending on the bandwidth. So eventually, I think it will make up, the support for the organizations. Do you think that's a fair possibility, Mark?
Absolutely. I mean, that sounds like that could very much be a reality in the future. And yeah, no, I mean, it remains to be seen, but for sure, orchestras are going to be involved in like the Berlin Philharmonic and their, virtual, well, it's not virtual. What's the official name of it? But their digital concert.
Right. Digital concert series. Yeah.
Yeah. And that has kind of been admired by many orchestras for a very long time. And that probably will be like a prototype for what is going to be built by many orchestras across the globe. So to do exactly what you just said, to supplement live performance.
And we, I'm not doing anything right now because we don't know where we're at. But the plan was for Mark to perform and teach some here in the fall as part of the Bach for Humanity project. And I'm still hoping to do that. I just think that we will not have, an audience there. I think, we'll probably work with smaller groups of students depending on how fall goes or spring or whenever it is, but then hopefully stream that concert.
Absolutely, that'd be wonderful.
Solo cello. So, Kath, I think we have a question from a viewer.
We do. Wayne asks, I heard a world-class brass player talk about how he learned to play with better phrasing by listening to string players. Can you say you have a takeaway from listening to brass or vocal musicians that influence your playing? Do you have any specific examples of that?
Absolutely. I think the best musicians are aware of, all the other musicians, and especially within the sound world and the music that you're dealing with, whatever you're performing, and also the human voice. I mean, most in Western European music and classical music, the ideal going back to the Renaissance was the human voice. And so all these instruments were trying to emulate the quality of the human voice. And then there comes being colorful on your instrument. So one of the easiest ways to do that is, there's one hand, you think of the human voice and the various registers, and from soprano to bass, and also the different types of singers. Are you a lyric soprano? Are you a coloratura? Are you a dramatic tenor? And then to really, develop those different sounds on whatever the instrument is you're playing. And then when it comes to the other side of ways to make color, there's a way of thinking. It's called orchestration. You can to orchestrate your playing, and that is to try to make your instrument sound like a different instrument, or to even get more esoteric, to try to play a note or a phrase on your instrument the way another instrument would play. So, and the reason that's useful is, like, if you're playing a piece that has a trombone chorale, in the orchestra, and you're playing a solo line, you might want to speak their language and play with very blown sounds, to communicate with them so that you're on the same page. And I think likewise, I mean, we all learn and take things from what is sort of the featured aspects of playing that instrument. I mean, that's absolutely a great question that was asked.
I wonder if we have about 5 minutes left. We have time. One more question if you have one, Jeff. And then I wonder if we could each talk about just like one moment where you saw music bring people together and maybe change a heart. Because I think that, in the world we're living in right now, and that'll bring it right back to the very beginning of Mark's Bach for Humanity explanation. It's, when one moment that you experienced where music just built a bridge between two people or 200 people or 2,000 people. But first, Jeff, you got one more question for us?
Well, actually, I keep all the questions I had written out were answered well ahead of time here. But I keep building on other questions here. Is there, in classical music, and particularly with Bach, are there cultural ways of playing Bach or playing any classical music? So you're kind of insinuating, do you play differently in Japan than you're playing in the United States or in Germany or in Brazil, or it's the same piece, or do Brazilian, musicians play it differently, or Japanese musicians play Bach differently?
Well, that's a very interesting and sophisticated question. It's wonderful. Basically, to play a piece of music in a cultured way, you just have to understand some basic fundamentals of how the language that the composer spoke works, because music is directly connected to language. And so Bach, we know, is a German composer, so we know that we need to have a good there's a structure there in terms of a strong downbeat. We need to have a phrasing that's arched but not too high and not too low, and then also experiencing the harmonies is very much as you go along. I mean, of course, in all music, but in a kind of an earthy way, is going to be more Germanic. And then of course there's the Baroque aspect too, which is more up in the air versus later Germanic music. So these are the things that are important to know. But you asked an interesting question. Yeah, without those cultural understandings, I can give a really fun example of a piece I once taught in Brazil. I was at a cello festival in Rio de Janeiro, and a Brazilian young lady came in and played the Boccherini B-flat major Grützmacher edition cello concerto. So first movement. So she's playing along. She's playing very well. And then she got to this, getting towards the end of the exposition, and she starts playing. And it started sounding like Brazilian music, and I was scratching my head. I'm like, what's wrong with this? I mean, obviously it's not right, but and I realized it was a musical stress issue, because she's giving that passage the stress of Portuguese instead of the Italian early classical stresses that the music needs. And so it can make things sound very entertaining. I once heard a neo-Baroque piece for a cello ensemble that was written by a modern composer, but based in the Baroque style. And I just by chance I heard it once in Japan, played by Japanese children, and then 2 months later heard it in Brazil, played by Brazilian children. And the Japanese children played this piece. They go dum dum yatta dum bum 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 like that. And then the Brazilian children played the same piece, and they went tim tam tita 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 tita. And so basically they're playing with their native tongues. And so that's what really so playing with the cultural understanding is important, because it helps us get closer to what's the truth, and that's the musical truths that are found in each composition.
And
that's very neat. Thank you.
Also, I'd like to just everybody kind of check it out at some point. I think, it's interesting. There was many years ago, a 12-year-old cellist who may or may not have lived in my house, who, when a teacher questioned her interpretation of a movement of the Bach cello suite, looked at him quizzically, and he kind of deserved it because it was an unfair critique, and said, newsflash, pal, Bach is dead and you didn't know him. So there is something to be said for taking music and making it your own in whatever way. And Václav Nelibel, who, the late Václav, who was such a genius, he was our composer in residence, talked a lot about you have to express yourself through that music. And as a composer, I write it, but I want you to make it yours. And a really cool example of that, Nicola Benedetti, if you go to her foundation, does this thing for, developing and young violinists and string players. But if you go to the Facebook page for the Benedetti Foundation, I only know this because the video editor on this and the person who put the audio lined it up was my son. There's a recording of a Paganini Caprice with jazz rhythm section behind it, where they play it swing style. And it's all these young people and, developing musicians. And it's just spectacular. And it shows that great music crosses all of those lines.
It does. And what I'd like to add is this is so true what you say. But I'd like to add to what you said and what I said. The ideal is, I always talk about, the ways of doing something. It's about what side of the mountain you're going up. And then with every musical composition, there are, it's an abstract thing, but there are certain things we know about a composition that are facts. We know that this is true and the composer thought about it this way and this and this and this. And then I say that creates a sort of stadium or ballpark. And then within that ballpark, there are infinite possibilities to interpret and do things differently and in an individual way. So it's a combination of doing things in a culturally informed way, but also in a personal way. And it's the personal way that's going to connect with the audience, because the expression, your individuality is what's going to connect with an audience. The other is what's going to just make the music on a higher level.
And again, coming full circle, Glenn Gould.
Yes.
That used to be 12-year-old cellist who's now 33 just texted me, God, I hate when you tell that story. Ask him what his favorite recording of the cello, who did your favorite recording of the cello suites? I'd like to know that a lot.
Oh, geez. There's so many good ones. I'll give you 3 or 4 of my favorite ones. The old Pierre Fournier Bach suites. The last cycle, Starker recorded them no less than 6 cycles of full 6 Bach suites, 6 recordings. But the last one where he won the Grammy for RCA. And I would say Honor Bylsma, the great Dutch cellist, who isn't... I don't know how much he's I don't think he's even around anymore, but he was one of the pioneers of period playing on the cello, and he has 2 cycles of Bach suites. I'm more familiar with the earlier cycle. I would definitely highly recommend those. Beyond that, I have a soft spot for Yo-Yo Ma. I think one of the first CDs I ever owned was his Bach suites. So he's obviously one of the great charismatic cello performers. So those are some of the ones those would be at the top of my list for sure. Those.
Where do you have somewhere to be, because it is 8:30? Can we finish up?
If there are a few more questions, I'm happy to stick around. So
okay, I just wanted here to when did we all see music bring a bridge? And I'll start with the microcosm within one of my own jazz bands, and it was a moment I'll never forget, and it's many, many years ago. But a new freshman came in that was it's where the ears triumphed over the eyes, and he sat down a little further than the rest of the section, and he kind of kept himself, apart, and he had long hair down to his ass, which is very unusual on our campus, and he wore shorts and snow, and he never ever left the house, even during tuxedo days, without a Star Wars shirt on, even if it had to be under whatever he was wearing. And he was just he didn't look like the rest of the band. And he sat down, and within 5 minutes of starting to play, he was the greatest baritone saxophone player, student, that had come across in my 39 years, even better than Zabosky, but don't tell him that. And the whole band didn't even realize it. They moved closer. And by the end of that jazz band rehearsal, everybody was next to him, and he walked out the most popular freshman. And it was, when he walked in, their eyes said, "What's with the hair?" You know what I mean? And the minute he started to play, all of those walls that they kind of tentatively put up, I mean, he didn't play 10 notes. Those walls were gone and the chairs were inching over. And I love that story. I just love that because it's such a personal story. It isn't, we're not changing millions, we're changing one heart. And I think that, you know, our ears are changing our hearts because they're reminding us that we have a common heart and a common soul. And sometimes our ears are the way it's going to be easiest to do that. So that's my story.
Fantastic.
Anybody else? Who else?
I can speak to that. I thought of two instances right away when you asked that question. One was at a wedding of two university alums that I was singing at with other folks who we had all met through the liturgical music choir at the university. And when we sang this song, "Send Us Your Spirit" by Dan Schutte, you know, it was something that we had worked on as students together, and this was years later. You know, and for a particularly emotional occasion, their wedding. And it was amazing. There wasn't a dry eye in the church when we sang it. And we all felt it. Everyone felt how wonderful it was years later, even. But the second thing was, again, relating to the university, was there was a reunion held of people who had served as orientation aides. And so there were folks, you know, myself and others who were out many, many years out of school. But when we sang the alma mater, it was wonderful. It's a great piece of music. And it was the best way to start because we all knew it. And we all had a love for the song and the university and the work that we had done together. And it just was an easy way to break the ice and, you know, it just brought the whole group together, 100 people who had been serving for 30-something year span. So that was great.
That's pretty cool. I actually love our alma mater, and I did partly because it can bring so many different age groups together. The first thing I thought of when you asked the question, well, actually, the very first thing I thought of was listening to my kids play music, you know, whether they're singing or playing, and that's just, but for me personally, is the coolest thing in the world. But the other thing is when I was a very young. Probably 22, 23 years old, living in New Orleans, I would go help with a camp in Selma, Alabama. That was mostly about 300 or 400 junior high or high school kids, almost all African-American kids who were experiencing a lot of racism in those days, you know, and they would get together. It was run by a lot of former civil rights activists. And we would spend a week in Selma, Alabama, talking about the lives of kind of the kids and what they're doing, walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge where the police officers beat on the activists there, kind of, you know, unfortunately we haven't gotten too far to today's time, but then getting together at night and every night, but particularly the night after we walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and singing for a couple of hours. It was such a healing time and such a bridge between the older civil rights activists and these, you know, 14, 15, 16-year-olds. And it was just inspiring. And there generally was never a dry eye in the house as well. It was just a really cool thing.
Mark, you want to just finish up with whatever you think will wrap this up, my dear?
Well, I mean, I think there's been so many incredible experiences I've been a part of, either in being personally involved or witnessing. And I guess I would like to just speak of a couple performances where I was a spectator, because that is from the outside perspective. Probably or many of you may know the name, although not as well known now as perhaps 15 years ago, simply because this artist intentionally cut back on the number of performances they play worldwide every year, but still plays annually or was playing at Carnegie Hall. Evgeny Kissin, the great Russian pianist. And I went to hear his a recital he played, or a half of a recital, because I didn't have, I couldn't get there before, but in New York City. And I also heard him play an entire recital in Chicago. And the way the public responded to his performances, it wasn't just a standing ovation. It was people were yelling for joy, having heard him. And he was such a powerful performer. He started the third piano sonata of Johannes Brahms in Carnegie Hall with the big F minor, bom, dum, ba-da-da. And I just remember I heard about 2 bars and I started crying, and I had no idea why. It was just that powerful. And then he just had this unbelievable communicative gift. And I remember walking out of Carnegie Hall that night afterwards, and it's like everything had changed. This is a musical performance that absolutely changed me from beginning to end. I heard Leon Fleischer, the great American pianist, perform at the University of Buffalo. I was in town playing Haydn C Major Concerto with the Buffalo Philharmonic, and I had a night off, and Leon Fleischer's at the University of Buffalo playing. So I went over there, and I remember he played the great famous B-flat Schubert piano sonata. I remember in the second movement, it was so captivating, and there was so much the underlying sadness in Schubert. There was so much of this pain and anguish being expressed that it was creating a visual effect, like the energy and you could see the lights changing. It had that effect on the listener, and that was just an unforgettable performance. Symphonic performances, if I talk about concerts, there's been very many memorable performances as a member of an orchestra, and especially the one here in town, the obscure Cleveland Orchestra. I would say, there's so many great performances. There was a performance not long ago, I'll mention Herbert Blomstedt again, who conducted Beethoven 6 and Mendelssohn's Scottish Symphony. And I remember in those performances, he interpreted them in a way that it seemed like you had never heard the pieces before, and you experienced them in a transcendent way that you hadn't experienced before. And that's the sign of an incredible artist of the absolute highest level. But it changes the musicians, everybody in the hall listening, everybody performing. And at the end, the orchestra gave him an ovation at one point, and nobody stood and made him to acknowledge his greatness. And that's always very special, because that doesn't happen every day. Although it happens more days than it should with an orchestra like the Cleveland Orchestra.
I think, it's interesting. In our hall, there is one artist that every time it isn't just applauding, it's like screaming. And that's Wycliffe Gordon. And for our viewers tonight, he will be, he was our guest 2 weeks ago. He will be our guest once or twice more this summer, along with others. We have, as I told you, we have Lauren Schoenberg, David Oswald, and Ricky Riccardi, Wycliffe Gordon. We've got Jeff Curnow from the Philadelphia Orchestra talking about humor and music, because he's also a genius cartoonist. He does all those NPR cartoons. A few of my friends from the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra are going to join us. And so we're going to keep this going through the summer. I think it's interesting, because I think it'll help us not only build, but keep our audiences engaged, as well as our students. So we hope that you'll tell your friends about it. These informances do stay up on our Facebook page so you can go back and check out anyone that you haven't heard. I would like to very much thank my colleagues, Kathy and Jeff. It was great to have people that love music and kind of get the bigger picture in an interdisciplinary way here to and Mark, I just love you to pieces. This was awesome. This is like, I'm looking at the time and I'm saying, like, we really took advantage. I'm sorry, but it was like, it felt like it flew. We went far over and we kept viewers. So thank you all so very, very much, and watch for the details on our next one.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's been just a pleasure being here with you tonight.
Thank you.